In the heart of the Namibian desert, a dying lion lay motionless beneath the burning sun, his ribs sharp against his skin, his eyes sunken and lifeless, until a wildlife doctor knelt beside him. What happened next defied everything science thought it knew. This wasn't just a rescue, it was the beginning of an unbreakable bond that would shock the world and rewrite the rules of human-animal connection forever. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The sun was brutal that day. It hung over the dry Namibian desert like a burning eye, watching every living thing with no mercy. Dr. Nolan Reyes wiped sweat from his brow as he stepped over a patch of cracked earth. He was on patrol with Kalo, a local wildlife tracker, checking for snares and signs of poaching. The ground was silent, no birds, no wind, just heat and stillness. Nolan had been working with wild animals for more than 20 years. He had seen lions up close, treated injured cheetahs, even stitched up a rhino once. But something about that day felt different. Kalo suddenly stopped. He raised a hand. Nolan paused. "There," Kalo whispered, pointing toward a hollow, near a dried-up salt pan. "Something's there." At first, Nolan saw nothing, just a twisted mess of grass and dirt. Then it moved, barely. The shape of a lion came into view, lying so still that it looked like a sun-bleached statue. As they walked closer, Nolan's heart sank. It was a full-grown male lion, or what was left of one. Every rib stuck out beneath a coat that used to be golden but was now dull and matted. His mane was tangled with dirt. Flies swarmed over open wounds on his side. The lion wasn't growling. He wasn't even lifting his head. He was just breathing, barely. "I think he's gone," Nolan murmured, kneeling beside him. But then the lion did something that stopped him cold. The lion opened his eyes, not wide, just enough. And in those sunken eyes, Nolan saw something he would never forget. It wasn't fear, it wasn't wild aggression, it was something else entirely. It was a plea. It was like the lion was saying, "Please, help me." Nolan stared back, heart racing. He had treated many animals before, but never had he felt this strange connection. The lion's eyes followed him, slow and steady, like he understood who Nolan was, like he trusted him. "Kalo," Nolan said quietly, still looking at the lion. "This one isn't just wounded. He's giving up." The tracker nodded, his face heavy with concern. "He's not eaten in weeks, maybe no water for days. We're lucky we found him before the jackals did." Nolan took a deep breath. His training told him what he should do. The lion was in bad shape. Dehydrated, starving, paralyzed in his back legs, there was almost no chance of survival. Euthanasia would be the humane option. But still, those eyes. "Something's keeping him alive," Nolan said softly. "Some part of him still wants to fight." Kalo didn't answer, but Nolan saw him quietly unpack the emergency field kit. They worked quickly. Nolan set up an IV drip using a makeshift pole stuck in the dry ground. He inserted a needle into a vein near the lion's front leg. The lion didn't flinch. He just lay there, his breath shallow. But his eyes never left Nolan. They gave him fluids first, then antibiotics. "Pain relief," Nolan whispered quietly to the lion. Not sure why, just feeling like the silence needed filling. "I don't know who you are," he murmured. "But you're not done yet, are you?" As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, Nolan faced a tough decision. The nearest facility was 200 kilometers away, and even if they called for a helicopter, it wouldn't get there before nightfall. "We'll stay here," he told Kalo. "I'm not leaving him alone." Kalo raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. "I'll start a fire. Nights get cold out here." That night, the desert temperature dropped fast. Nolan wrapped the lion, now named Rano, meaning sunrise, in emergency blankets. He used his own jacket as extra cover. Then he sat beside him, a flashlight tucked into the ground, casting soft light on the lion's battered face. Rano didn't sleep. Not really. Every time Nolan moved to adjust the IV or check his pulse, the lion's eyes blinked open and followed him. Once Rano made a low, soft sound, not a growl, more like a quiet rumble. It sounded thankful. "It's all right," Nolan whispered, touching the lion's mane gently. "You're not alone anymore." The night was long, cold, quiet, and surreal. A man and a dying lion side by side in the middle of nowhere, both hanging on in their own ways. By dawn, help was on the way. Kalo had radioed a wildlife helicopter. The pilot said he'd land nearby if the wind allowed. But Nolan wasn't thinking about that yet. He was still watching Rano's chest rise and fall, still talking softly, still trying to believe that, maybe, just maybe, this lion had a chance. As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky with orange and pink, Rano blinked slowly and let out a soft exhale. And in that fragile moment, Nolan didn't see a wild beast. He saw hope. The morning, light rose over the desert, calm and golden. A quiet breeze moved across the dry grass, but Dr. Nolan Reyes had no time to enjoy the beauty of the day. He was kneeling beside Rano, the lion who somehow was still alive after a night in the open. The fluids had helped, but the lion was still dangerously weak. Nolan glanced toward the horizon. A distant thump, thump, thump of rotor blades echoed across the desert. The rescue helicopter was coming. "Hang in there, big guy," Nolan whispered. "Help's almost here." Kalo helped clear an area for the landing. When the small, white helicopter touched down, dust swirled everywhere. The pilot gave Nolan just one look before shouting over the noise, "Is that what we're flying with?" "That," Nolan replied, "is Rano. And yes, we are." Moving a 400-pound lion into a helicopter wasn't easy. Nolan had to sedate Rano lightly, but still keep the IV line in place. Every second mattered. With help from Kalo and the pilot, they managed to load Rano onto a makeshift stretcher and secure him inside. As the helicopter lifted off, Nolan kept one hand on the lion's paw and the other on the IV bag. Rano didn't move, but his slow breathing was steady. He was still fighting. 2 hours later, they landed at a wildlife rehabilitation center near Swakopmund. Waiting for them was Dr. Lena Ormond, the lead vet at the facility. She crossed her arms as she looked at the unconscious lion. "This is what you brought me?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "He looks half dead." "He's more than he looks," Nolan replied. "Trust me." She sighed and nodded. "All right. Let's see what we can do." Inside the treatment room, a team of nurses worked quickly. Lena and Nolan examined Rano carefully. Lena's face was calm, but her voice was serious. "Severe dehydration, malnourished, and his hind legs, they're not moving." Nolan nodded. "I think there's spinal damage. He's been dragging himself. Probably injured weeks ago." She leaned closer to the lion's face, watching him breathe. Then something happened. Rano opened his eyes. He didn't panic. He didn't growl. He just looked at Lena, then turned his eyes to find Nolan, slowly, calmly, as if to say, "There you are." Lena pulled back, clearly surprised. "He's aware. Most wild lions would be trying to bite us by now." "He trusts," Nolan said softly. "That's what's keeping him alive." They prepped Rano for surgery. The damage to his spine had to be explored. The procedure would be long and risky. Nolan scrubbed in and stayed through the whole thing. Even though he wasn't a surgeon, he refused to leave Rano's side. For nearly 8 hours, Lena worked carefully on Rano's injured spine. She removed dead tissue, adjusted pressure near the nerves, and worked to reduce swelling that had built up over time. Through it all, Rano remained calm under anesthesia, his heartbeat steady. "Most lions would have gone into shock," Lena said quietly as she stitched up the last incision. "But not this one. It's like he knows we're helping him." After surgery, Rano was moved into the recovery wing. The team set up a warm, quiet space just for him. IVs were still running, and a feeding tube had been placed for nutrition. But the real change wasn't medical, it was personal. Nolan rolled out a cot and placed it next to Rano's enclosure. He had no intention of leaving. He would sleep there, eat there, and care for Rano himself. Days passed. Rano remained still but alert. His eyes followed Nolan every time he entered the room. Nurses noticed it too. Whenever Nolan was nearby, Rano seemed calmer. He responded to Nolan's voice, blinked when spoken to, and even let out a soft purring sound when Nolan touched his mane. "He acts like he's known you for years," one nurse said, astonished. "I feel the same," Nolan replied with a smile. Despite the progress, Rano's legs still didn't move. Lena checked the nerves each day, hoping for even the smallest twitch. Nothing. The fear was growing. What if he never walked again? What if he never recovered? But Nolan refused to give up. He brought in physical therapy mats. He massaged Rano's legs daily, trying to stimulate circulation. He adjusted the lion's position regularly to avoid pressure sores. Every day he talked to Rano like an old friend. "You made it out of the desert," he said during one quiet evening. "Now let's see what you can do in here." Then one morning something changed. Rano lifted his head and turned toward the open window. A soft breeze rolled in. He sniffed the air. Then slowly, so slowly, he flexed one back paw. Just a little. Just enough. Nolan saw it and nearly shouted. "Lena!" he called. "Come here. Now!" She rushed in and saw the movement with her own eyes. It wasn't much, but it was real. "He moved," Nolan whispered. He really moved. Lena stared at the lion for a long moment. "I can't explain it, but this lion, he's not just surviving, he's choosing to live." And so began a new chapter. Rano, once broken and abandoned in the desert, was no longer just a patient. He was a survivor standing at the edge of two worlds, one of wild instincts and one of quiet trust, and he wasn't done writing his story. Weeks passed since Rano's first small movement. It had been just a twitch, one paw flexing slightly, but it was enough to spark hope in everyone at the Wildlife Center, especially Dr. Nolan Reyes. Each morning, Nolan would step quietly into the recovery room. The first thing he always saw were Rano's golden eyes watching him. They were no longer filled with pain and confusion. Now they showed something else. Recognition. Rano had started eating soft meals and the feeding tube was removed. He still couldn't walk, but his strength was returning. With every passing day, his breathing grew deeper, his growl a little louder, and his energy a little brighter. But what amazed the team most wasn't just his physical recovery. It was the bond. Between him and Nolan, Rano, a wild lion, began to behave in ways no one could explain. Whenever Nolan stepped out of the room, Rano would lift his head and look toward the door. If Nolan took too long to return, Rano would make quiet, low sounds, not angry or distressed, just waiting. "He misses you," one of the nurses said, smiling as she watched Rano's eyes shift toward the hallway. "He doesn't like being alone," Nolan replied gently, brushing his fingers through the lion's thickening mane. "And honestly, neither do I." Dr. Lena Ormond had seen many strange cases in her career, but this one puzzled her in the best possible way. "I've never seen a lion act like this," she admitted one evening. "It's like he thinks you're part of his pride." "I don't know what I am to him," Nolan said, "but he knows I'm not leaving." Physical therapy began with small movements. Nolan would gently move Rano's back legs, hoping to rebuild muscle memory and stimulate nerve response. Rano didn't resist. He lay calmly, even when the stretches were uncomfortable. It was as if he understood they were helping. The center brought in a special sling to support Rano's body while keeping his legs off the ground. Every day, Nolan helped lift Rano into the device. And every day, Rano tried, just a little harder, to move. 3 weeks into therapy, the team saw another sign. Rano managed to lift his tail. It wasn't much, but it meant something incredible. The connection between his brain and lower body was healing. "He shouldn't be able to do that," Lena whispered, eyes wide. "With the damage he had, this just shouldn't be happening." "But it is," Nolan said, not looking away from Rano, "because he refuses to give up." As news of Rano's progress spread, the world began to take notice. A video clip of him trying to move his back legs was shared on social media, and within days it had millions of views. Comments poured in from all over the globe, people touched by his story, cheering for his recovery. Donations followed. People offered to support Rano's treatment, rehabilitation, and even future conservation efforts. For the first time in years, the center had more funding than they ever expected. But none of that compared to the moment everything changed. It was early morning. Nolan had just finished a therapy session and was checking Rano's vitals. As he leaned over to adjust the sling, something moved behind him. He turned and froze. Rano had shifted his weight. His back paws were flat on the mat. Then, slowly and shakily, Rano began to push himself up. Nolan couldn't believe what he was seeing. The lion who had been paralyzed and near death in the desert was standing, just for a few seconds. But he stood. "Lena," Nolan called out, barely able to find his voice. "Get in here." Lena rushed into the room and stopped dead in her tracks. She saw it too. Rano, shaky and trembling, using his own legs to hold himself upright. "I don't believe it," she whispered. The team surrounded the enclosure in awe. Rano looked at each of them, then slowly lowered himself back down with a heavy breath. He was exhausted, but his eyes glowed with determination. That night, Nolan sat next to Rano as usual, but this time, it felt different. There was a quiet understanding between them, something deeper than anything Nolan had ever felt. "You've done more than survive," Nolan said softly. "You've taught us something no book could ever explain." Rano blinked slowly, then let out a soft, almost human sigh. He was still healing, still weak, but the message was clear. Rano wasn't just a lion anymore. He was a symbol of strength, trust, and the power of connection. From that day on, Nolan no longer called him just a patient. He called him family. 6 months had passed since the day Rano took his first steps. What began as a desperate rescue in the desert had become a story shared around the world. People followed Rano's progress like a beloved series. Every new photo, every update from Dr. Nolan Reyes sparked thousands of messages from strangers who felt deeply connected to the lion that wouldn't give up. Rano was stronger now. He could walk short distances on his own, stretch out in the sun, and even chase slow-moving toys the staff made for him. But while his body was healing, something else had changed. He had grown restless. He spent more time near the enclosure gate, pacing slowly, often looking out toward the bush beyond the center. He would sniff the air and stare into the trees, like he was waiting for something, or someone. "He wants more than just to live," Nolan said one afternoon, watching Rano through the fence. "He wants to go somewhere." "Back to the wild?" one of the volunteers asked. "Maybe not the wild," Nolan said thoughtfully, "but somewhere he remembers." The next morning, Rano made his intentions clear. As Nolan stepped into the enclosure with fresh water, Rano walked over, not with the wobble of a patient, but with the purpose of a guide. He gently took Nolan's wrist in his mouth, careful not to bite, and tugged. Then he stepped away, looking back with a clear message in his eyes. "Follow me." Nolan hesitated only for a second. Then he opened the gate. They walked together, side by side, through the open fields behind the center. A small drone recorded the journey from above, sending live footage to the team and, unknowingly, to millions watching online. Rano didn't run. He didn't try to escape. He walked with calm purpose, glancing back from time to make sure Nolan was still there. For over an hour, they moved quietly through the bush. Birds flew overhead, and the wind carried the scent of distant rain. Then, up ahead, came the sound of soft growling. A lioness. 3 lionesses stood near a patch of scrub, their cubs nestled close by. They looked thin, wary, and alert. Nolan stopped, uncertain. But Rano kept moving forward. He walked between Nolan and the pride and let out a soft call, a low, rhythmic sound, not threatening, but familiar. The lionesses didn't run. They watched closely as Rano approached. Then something amazing happened. They let him in. Rano walked among them as if he had never left. He nudged one of the cubs gently, who responded with a playful swat. The lionesses relaxed, their muscles softening. One of them licked Rano's shoulder, a clear sign of recognition. Nolan realized what he was seeing. "This is his family," he whispered. This was his pride. He remembered the area well. Before he had found Rano dying in the desert, he had seen this pride once, struggling to survive the drought. It made sense now. Rano must have belonged to them. They had lost him. And now, he had found his way back. Only this time he didn't come alone. Over the next days, Nolan and his team worked quickly. They set up water stations and feeding spots nearby, working with local conservation officials to get long-term support for the pride. Rano stayed with them, watching as Nolan moved among the lionesses. He became a bridge, proof that trust between wild animals and humans could exist in rare, beautiful moments. Word spread fast. Footage of Nolan and Rano walking side by side, and the lion guiding him to the pride, became one of the most watched wildlife videos in history. News stations, wildlife experts, and everyday people called it the most extraordinary example of animal intelligence and emotional depth ever seen. Dr. Lena Ormond flew in to witness it herself. She stood beside Nolan watching Rano play with the cubs. "You gave him life," she said quietly. "And he gave you something back." Nolan nodded. "He gave me purpose. Eventually, for Rano's safety and the safety of the pride, he was returned to the wildlife center. He could no longer hunt the way he once did, and he was still healing. But the bond remained. Each week, Nolan would take him for slow walks near the edge of the bush, and every now and then, they would visit the pride together. Rano was no longer just a lion. He was a teacher, a symbol, and in a way, a friend. Rano lived for 7 more years. He became a face for wildlife conservation, helping raise money and awareness for lions all over Africa. People from around the world came to see him. Children wrote letters, artists painted murals, and through it all, Nolan remained by his side. When Rano passed away peacefully, Nolan was there, his hand resting gently on Rano's mane. The center held a small ceremony, and Rano's ashes were scattered at the edge of the bush where he had first found his pride. A statue now stands at the sanctuary. It shows a man walking beside a lion, not as a master and beast, but as equals. At the base of the statue are these simple words: "He didn't just survive, he led the way."